Welcome. We are live. This is today's episode of MicroConf On Air. I am your host, Rob Wallen. Every Wednesday, we live stream for about 30 minutes. We cover topics related to building and growing ambitious startups that don't require us to work 80-hour weeks, raise millions in venture capital, or drive us to the brink of burnout. We believe in a long-term mindset. We think in terms of years, not in months. And as such, we don't grind ourselves into little pieces of human flesh by working these crazy hours and sacrificing our mental health or our relationships. That's what MicroConf, Startups for the Rest of Us, is all about, and that's the lens through which we view startups. Today, I'm excited to have a slightly different episode format. I guess we did one of these in the past, but we're doing what's called a Founder Spotlight, a MicroConf Connect Founder Spotlight. And so if you haven't heard, I'd be surprised because I say it every week on this live stream. But MicroConf Connect is MicroConf's year-round Slack channel, and it's our online community. And we have 1,150 founders or something, approaching 1,200 at this point, who are in there, ambitious, building cool things. Most are bootstrapped. There's some are self-funded, some have raised small amounts of money, but it's not the venture track. Go crazy, ask people for permission to build your business. It's, hey, let's actually build a real business for real customers who are paying us real money, rather than sitting around waiting for someone to write us a check to be able to do it. And so today we're going to be talking with two of our Connect founders who are at different stages. So it'll be kind of fun to get to know these folks. The first founder I want to bring on, and we'll talk for about half the episode, and then we'll transition to second. The first one is Edwin Williams. He's the founder and CEO of ZenHammer, which he calls the pocket office for subcontractors. And that's construction, I believe, not like developer subcontractors. He's also the Associate VP of the Johnson City, Tennessee Area Home Builders Association. As a reminder, if you have questions, put them in the MicroConf On Air channel in MicroConf Connect. I'm going to ask him a few questions, and as we go, if you have any, it'd be great if you could let us know so I can ask him to Edwin. So, Edwin, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you again. I know we missed the last conference, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's great to have you here, man. I'm glad to hear, or I'm happy to be able to dig into what you've been doing with ZenHammer. We were talking offline right before we started streaming that you were going to launch a couple weeks ago. You ran into some technical issues, and so you're looking to launch in the next week or two. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Turn everything live and go. It's exciting. It's scary. We've got some website redesigns to do as well. But yeah, yep. I'm really excited, really scared, but that's life.
That's par for the course. That's why we do this, I think, right? Both to scare ourselves and also to, to just feel alive, sir. So do you have you have an email launch list then? Like, kind of what are your plans for the launch rollout? I'm curious. This is off script, by the way. I had a list of questions that I talked to Edwin about, and then I'm just going to play by ear here. But I just realized I wanted to hear more about, what you're thinking in terms of that.
So yes, I actually have a pretty good email list. I've collected over the last couple of years from when we did Perserbid, pre-pivot to ZenHammer, and even with the last year with going to different associations, meeting people, getting their contacts, and people were like, "This is cool. Keep us updated." And so I've built out like about a couple hundred personal contacts I've made. Start with that group as warm email marketing, and then move from there to like visiting associations, Facebook campaigns, and other methods of reaching the market. So.
All right, cool. And so that's in the conversation today, I think I have a couple goals. Number one, there are folks in Connect who, want to hear your story because they see you in Connect talking about things. And it's always nice to just know more about the founders that you're interacting with. So I want to hear a little more about that. In addition, it's nice to bring in some learnings, some learnings from your experiences of things you feel like you've done well, things maybe you made a mistake and have learned from, including, you just mentioned, you pivoted. I think I want to start with this. You pivoted your prior app to ZenHammer. You want to tell us, what you learned doing this and what that process was like?
So yeah, when I started, the idea was Perserbid, personal service bidding, where homeowners could post jobs and contractors would bid on them, and we'd hold the money in escrow. And
so like a two-sided marketplace.
Yes, and I'll never forget my first MicroConf conference. Everybody was like, "Don't do marketplaces."
Don't do it. Yeah. If you had written into me on the podcast, I'd have been like, here's my first piece of advice. Don't do it. So yeah, they're hard. But
Yeah,
so
yeah,
did you try to get that going and it was
yeah.
brutal?
And we ran into a couple of interesting problems, not exactly what we expected. One problem was that the jobs were getting posted, but at least in our area, the contractors were busy and couldn't address those jobs. So they're like, if the people could wait 6 months, we can get to them, but nobody wants to wait 6 months to have their
Right.
deck remodeled. And then we also had a couple technical issues as well. And so as things weren't going as planned, we were actually at the point of calling it quits. And the contractors in the area were like, don't quit, you're almost there. Here's what we really want. And so what the biggest thing that I'd say I learned out of the pivot was we were asking the wrong question. For our market, the contractors didn't need more customers. They just needed a better way to handle the customers.
Wow.
And yeah. So we sat down with them, sat down with our friends and advisors, and did our business model, came up with ZenHammer. The name ZenHammer, I was basically told the contractors in our market, hey, if you want me to build this app for you, you have to help me name it. So I brainstormed some names, pushed it out to several people. They came back with the several names, and then we had a vote, and ZenHammer came out on top. So that's actually how we picked the name ZenHammer. So
crazy. Was it influenced at all by my wife, Zen Founder? I'm guessing it was.
No, I didn't know your wife had Zen Founder.
That's her Twitter handle and her podcast name. Yeah. So
Okay.
no. Okay. So keep going with that. So that's super interesting then. So you launch this marketplace. It's not working. The contractors are saying, don't shut it down. What we really need is the ability to manage communications. Is that the idea? Yeah. So they were basically telling you that's really cool. How many contractors were using it at that time, or were at least on the list, so to speak?
So off the list of Perserbid, I had about roughly 86 to 90 contractors who are on there.
Okay.
And then contractors I've been talking to on a regular basis, but hadn't signed up, that list goes up to about 200. But they were saying, this is what we'd like, this is what we want, here's what's in the market, here's what has not been addressed. And so when we sat down and wrote, and we're like, okay, what's the really big idea? We sat down and came up with a big idea, and then we scaled it back to like, okay, where do we start? And they're like, well, if you start right here, that will help us a lot. So that's where we're starting. And it's the quickest, easiest version that we can get out that does the core things that they need done. So that they're willing.
That's super helpful. It's super helpful to have those 86 contractors, right? Or the 90 contractors. So I'm curious how, I imagine someone listening to this is thinking, well, how do you get 90 contractors even interested in this app? What was that process like?
That's not a personal face-to-face.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so back to when I started Perserbid, I walked into the front door of the Johnson City Area Home Builders Association and pitched the idea to them. And the original idea, they're like, we don't think that'll work, but if you join us and have the contractors, talk to contractors, you can tweak the idea. And so that's how I got into the association. And then just by working with them over the years, that's how I got the list. That's how they signed up. And so it was a lot of personal equity put into meeting the people, sitting down with them, finding out what they want, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's like a different form of, you think about folks who build an audience, right? Whatever, a Basecamp, DHH and Jason Fried or a Justin Jackson or myself or whatever. And it's you spend these years doing a podcast, doing a blog, whatever. You did it in such a unique way where you went to a home builders association in Johnson City, Tennessee, which is where you live. And you just started talking to them, and then you became the associate VP, and suddenly that's that becomes a thing. I find that a pretty fascinating approach, and one I haven't really heard before.
Yeah,
we're getting a question in Slack. Sorry. Yeah, you can keep going with that.
So then now we're at the point where we're getting ready to launch, and we have all the contractors who've helped us through the redesign, the test, and so we're pretty excited about the reach that we hopefully will have over the next rest of the year going into 2021.
Cool. Well, we have a question from Pablo. He says, are you using Braintree Marketplace or have you evaluated it? But I guess if you're
So
not
I
running a
used
marketplace anymore, you wouldn't, right?
yeah. So we used Braintree Marketplace when we were under Preservid, but when we did our pivot, we
Hmm.
kind of threw the old stack away and built from the ground up, and now we're using Stripe Connect for our
Okay,
payment system.
cool. We do have a question, another question. This is from Tony from CloudForecast, who will be the next founder spotlight. But he says, do you have any goals or expectations about this upcoming launch? And I'll even add
I
to that,
do.
like, yeah, okay, cool. Go with it then. I'd love to just
Yeah.
hear that.
So our goal is for the next for Q3 to finish out Q3 is 25 paying subscribers by end of Q3, and then
Yep.
another 150 Q4. And then our goal then for 2021, like going out, we want to get at least 200 users, paying subscribers by the end of this year is our
Got
goal.
it. What's your price point approximately?
$49 a month, the subscription.
Okay.
And then when
Yep.
we add our next feature, we'll be taking a small percentage off of transaction fees between contract and the
Right.
client.
Right. Cool. So just between you and I, since no one else is listening, I love the idea of moving to SaaS from a marketplace. Like it's going from one of the hardest businesses where you need all this stuff to happen all at once really quickly to like,
Yeah,
I don't know, if we have 5 customers, we provide them with the same value as if we have 5,000, right? And as
yeah,
bootstrappers or early stage folks, that's super valuable. I want to ask a little bit about your network. We have about 3 or 4 more minutes before we have to bring Tony on,
sure.
but I have 2 more questions for you. The first one is, you mentioned specifically when you applied for the founder spotlight. And by the way, yes, if you're in Connect and you want to be, potentially featured on MicroConf On Air, I think producer Xander will post a link into the Slack channel, the On Air Slack channel, and you can apply. But in your application, you mentioned that one of the things you feel like you did really well while building ZenHammer is you built a really strong network. And I'm curious, what benefit, like specific benefits, did you gain from that?
So one of the things like through the network was experience that I didn't have. So where there was information that I didn't know. Like when I started, I was non-technical, and I've learned programming over the years, and that's
Yep.
come from studying, talking to other founders who have the skills. Like, how do I do this? What's to do? And even though I'm not doing the heavy lifting, I still understand what's going on, even though I'm focused on the sales and marketing. Also, experience in the industry. I learned a lot about the building industry needs from meeting people in the industry, listening to them talk, hearing them complain about what wasn't serving them, and trying to figure out, okay, nobody's addressing that specific thing. How do I help them in that specific area and get there? And building that network was a bunch of, again, meeting people, volunteering for events in the industry, helping people in the industry, and then just doing what I could to get to know the industry.
Yep.
And building it's been extremely helpful, and it's allowed me to go to like other markets and say, hey, I'm new here, but here's who I know, here's where I come from, here's what I do. And they're like, oh, come in. And it's given me access to other industry networks across the country. So
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that's a lot of hustle. And it's a lot of hard work. And frankly, it's a lot of things that some, especially I would say more people like me who are more developers, don't want to do when they're launching a SaaS, right? They don't want to get out of their basement, and they don't want to go shake hands and make in-person connections, but it is incredibly valuable. And so I think that's a lesson that folks should take away from your experience. Last question for you. We have about a minute. I want to hear you specifically mention one of your regrets or kind of a mistake you made was listening to the wrong people when you first got started. Talk to me about
yes.
that.
So one of the problems, especially like when you don't have any entrepreneur back people in your life,
Yep.
is you don't know who to ask information from. So one of the big mistakes I wish I hadn't listened to was someone told me that I never needed to learn programming. I can just hire it out without understanding the code. If
Sure.
I could go back, I would have told myself back then, learn the basics so you understand what's going on. Um, to know if what's being written is correct or not, and that type of thing.
Hmm.
Also, just basic business practices. There's a lot of wrong information. I blame the movie The Social Network for that, where they're like, you built it and people are just supposed to show up and you get $1 million. It does not work like that. And nobody tells you that if you don't know who to talk
Right.
to.
Right.
So finding the correct mentors, the correct people to talk to. I try to find people who have built businesses, who do marketing, who are good programmers, ask them for their advice, and try to learn from the mistakes that they made so you don't make them. Yes, you're going to make mistakes, but the goal is to make them, learn from them as fast as possible, iterate, and make
Yep.
that as quick as possible. I'm not going to say as painless as possible, but as quick as
Yeah.
possible. But yeah, I'd say if I had the correct information, things would have gone a lot differently. I'm not
Yeah.
going to say smoother as well, but
Right. We
different.
might get there a lot faster is typically how I
Yes.
think about it. I think a lot of us, especially when we become bootstrappers or self-funded, we've already gone down the venture path because we thought it was the only path because that's all everybody talks about. And people, you say, I'm going to start a software company. And they say, okay, so go build a deck and raise money. And it's like, wait a minute. Like, why is everyone saying that? Like, there's so many, like ZenHammer can be wildly successful and change your life and not need any of that, So it's having, and that's part of our mission, right? I mean, that's part of the MicroConf startups for the rest of us. Tiny Seed mission is to to not only offer that alternative, but to promote it such that people know that there are these other options out there, and it's better or worse than venture capital depending on your goals and how you want to go about it. So,
Yeah.
Edwin, thank you so much for joining me today, man. It was great to catch up.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you at a future MicroConf once we're able to get back in person.
Likewise.
All right, sir.
Thank you.
Take it easy. All right. Now, our second guest is Mr. Tony Chan. He's the co-founder and CEO of CloudForecast, and their H1 tag on cloudforecast.io is monitor and eliminate wasted costs in AWS without spending significant engineering time and resources. So Amazon Web Services, they're tracking billing and they're helping you do it more efficiently. Prior to CloudForecast, he worked at Perfect Audience, which some of you may have heard about. That was actually the first platform I ever used to do retargeting advertising. It was before Google and Facebook offered it specifically. Perfect Audience was this great platform. I love how he added this little personal bit, and I love it. Outside of work, his interests include tuning import cars, think Hondas, eating and cooking, travel, and Asian American history. Tony Chan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. First time caller, long time listener. So
yeah, awesome, man.
Yeah, I've known you for quite some time, so it's great to be part of this community and podcast here.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on. We've done several phone calls over the past couple of years, so I kind of have some pretty good context of CloudForecast, where you've been and where you're headed.
Yeah, you pretty much know a lot about us.
I know. It's surprising. Well, you follow a story and you just kind of, the hurdles and the bumps and the this and the that. So I think I want to remind folks in MicroConf on air, if you have questions for Tony as we move forward, please post them in the Slack. But for now, I'm going to just start diving into some questions that we talked about in advance. So I'm curious to hear what's been the hardest part, one of the hardest parts of building CloudForecast for you.
I would say, you read about Barometrics and he writes about the slow ramp of death. And I think for us, that's the hardest part, especially launching from scratch, getting data from just chatting with people, on your product and figuring out what to build. And especially if you're launching from scratch, you have an idea of your product and what you want to build, but as you're chatting with people, you have to kind of adjust that thinking a little bit. So that's been really hard, right? We had revenue goals, but that went out the door after a few months. But I would say that's been the hardest part. It's just like sticking with it, being consistent, always chatting with people, and just gathering that data on what we need to build to bring value to people in Amazon Web Services. So that's been really hard for us. Yeah.
Sometimes it takes a lot longer than the stories that we see, even the ones not on TechCrunch, right? I mean, if you look at the Barometrics story, like Josh went from they went from 0 to 30K MRR in not very much time, and I remember watching that. because he was, it was public, and thinking, oh man, this is really happening. And if you think that's the norm, you're going to be really, really disappointed because Josh caught lightning in a bottle, and if it might take you 2 years to get there, where it took him 4 months or whatever. And
right. And I think a lot of things we read kind of perpetuates the idea that, hey, this is an overnight success story, but there is just so much grit, hustle, learning. I don't like saying failure, more so setback, right?
Yeah.
That discourages you, and you're like, why am I not getting the success that I'm reading about? But it's relative, right? At the end of the day. So I think that's been hard, but we're making good progress on our side. The data that we're getting from our customers and the conversations are becoming a tighter story in some ways. Instead of making guesses, we're making better guesses than what we were doing before. So I think that's an encouraging part of where we're at last year when we did it for full time for 1 year total to what we have now. So that's been good for us.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, and I also meant to set the stage of the stage you're at before we started talking, but I'll do it now. So you mentioned to me that in essence you are 2 co-founders taking salaries and you're default to live. So that gives people somewhat of an idea. You're definitely definitely post revenue, but you don't have any employees or anything. Are there any other failures you want to talk about or mention?
I wouldn't call them failures, but
maybe setbacks, speed bumps.
Right? I think early on in my career, right, that's when I started changing that, because failure is such a finality to it in some ways. Like you failed and that's it. And I think that's what culture perpetuates. Like you fail and that's it. I think our greatest setback in different ways is just, we apply to a lot of accelerators on our side. And I think for us, getting rejected is really difficult in some ways. Because I think at that time when you're rejected, it's just a sinking feeling that you have. You're like, oh, did I fail as a founder? Is my product not good enough? But I think one thing that Francois had done really well is like we take a step back, we take a look at bigger picture. It's not indicative of who we are as founders or our product, but it's an opportunity for us to learn, an opportunity for us to like, okay, these are the things that they didn't like about us. They know what they're doing, right? They're smart startup people. How can we apply that and grow our business a little bit further? So I think that's the biggest one that we've faced. Every time we applied to Accelerator, got rejected, sinking feeling, took a step back, learned from it, and then we just grew from those opportunities, right? And just try to take advantage of those advice that we get from those accelerators.
Yeah, sorry, because you applied to Tiny Seed, and we it happens. You get 900 applicants, and I've liked what you guys are doing. I like your team, and it just at a certain point we can only.
At the end of the day, it's like I always talk to Francois about this. There's just so many things you just can't control.
Yeah.
Like extracurricular stuff, and it's very. I think if you dwell on it, you become consumed about it, right? But if we dwell on things that we can control, I think, you can build a better business out of that and put more effort to it and less brain power to kind of dealing with those issues.
Absolutely. That's a skill I didn't learn until way too late in my life. I was probably in my 30s before I learned to like let things go and realize, hey, let's focus on the things I am in control of,
Yeah.
Our next question is from Justin Jackson. He says, how do people currently find CloudForecast? What's going on in their life that brings them to you? And before you answer that, it's cloudforecast.io if you want to check out the website. But go ahead and hit us up, Tony.
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with a lot of startups and mid-market sized companies that might have a huge engineering team, and they're high growth, right? So their AWS bill is growing month over month over month. And their engineering team might be 20, 30, 40 people deep, and a lot of them are deploying things on Amazon Web Services. But with so many moving parts, what often can happen is you might deploy EC2 instance or a product that someone might not be aware of, and it just becomes a recurring cost, and you might not catch it in the end of the month. And then when the end of the month bill comes, you're like, whoa, why am I getting the surprise here? What is this, right? And it's already 15 days too late, right? And you can go to AWS and be like, hey, can I get a credit? But that's a problem, right? Because managing your costs is not going to make your product better at the end of the day, right? It's not going to make your features better. So what we do when we come in and the pain point that we help is just providing quick visibility to engineers. Like engineers don't like going into dashboards. They don't want to do another tool. Just provide a simple email on a daily basis that gives them a report and say, hey, here are the anomalies, here are the deltas, here are things that you should care about, here are things you shouldn't care about, archive, move on your day so you can focus on technical priorities.
Yeah, and it's an interesting problem you're solving, because before I experienced it, and I don't remember if it was Hittail or Drip, but at some point we left a server going. It's a typical thing, and suddenly we spent $1,000 in a month where our hosting should have been 200 or something. And before I experienced it, I didn't even think it would be an issue, so I wouldn't have sought you out. But the moment it happened, I was like, how did we not figure this out? Is there a solution? And of course, at the time, we, let's say it was somewhere between 2013, 2015. I don't remember there being solutions. I Googled AWS, tracking or whatever, and there wasn't anything there. So it's almost like, I imagine it's potentially an uphill battle for you to find people who have already experienced that pain, because it's an aspirin only if you've experienced the pain once, versus a vitamin before that.
And we try to be relevant with our code outreaches. That's one way that we're finding people. Like their bill arrives at the beginning of the month. So we do a lot of code outreach in the beginning of the month with, hey, here's did you get your AWS invoices? Were there any surprises? Right. And, and that's why we're pretty realistic about kind of where we're at with a bootstrap startup. Right. Other players in the space are focused on enterprise, right. And they're focused on bigger businesses, on whatnot. Whereas we're focused on mid-market, and AWS provides really great reporting tool, but we're in a big market, right? So that gives us a lot of opportunity, and we're a nice add-on tool to cost explore in different ways.
Yep, that makes sense. Another couple questions from Justin Jackson, and I'll split them up into two. But the first one he asks is, what marketing channels are working for you right now?
Yeah, marketing to engineers is always tough. They're very skeptical. They're highly skeptical. So I would say content is working really well for us, right? And being free value to them and building an audience that way. We have a few really strong blog posts that are very technical, related to Amazon Web Services. So that's been really helpful for us to drive more traffic and drive just organic search through our website. Another channel that we've been testing that we're starting to see success in is actually code outreach. A lot of people say code outreach doesn't work. That's 10 years ago, but surprisingly, for us, if we get a few that are larger, it still works, that are larger, and it makes sense. And that's the way that we've been able to acquire a lot of our larger customers as well. You just got to do it in a very solid way that's not too invasive, right? And you got to be respectful as well. So I think those are the rules that we follow within our space that we do for code outreach.
Very nice. And his follow-up is, are there any marketing channels that you haven't tried that you'd like to try?
Yeah, I think the part that Francois and I were just talking about yesterday is just building more assets of value to engineers, highly technical assets, whether it's an ebook or maybe a playbook of scripts of here are some scripts that you can run to help you scan through all your EC2 instances that are over provision, stuff like that. So I think that's the next move that we are going to invest a little bit more in, is just valuable assets for engineers, and continue to build an audience that way and continue to build more of a domain knowledge in the space through that.
Yeah, very cool. So last question before we wrap up. What do you think has been your biggest victory to date in building CloudForecast?
Yeah, I think for us, our greatest victory is just having difficult co-founder conversations that can often shut down a company. Whether it's, hey, when should we go full time? What should we pay ourselves? What is our equity structure looking like? And that's always really tough, right? Because when you read about just the startup landscape in general, that's when the moment where there's a lot of disagreements and failure can often happen within startups. But I think Francois and I, we've always taken a bigger picture of how we approach those tough founder conversations. One, we look out for each other's best interests, so that's really helpful for us, right? So We always look out for each other. What's the best of the company as well. But the bigger picture is like, we also look at it as a privilege for us to work on this full time as well, right? My family and my dad came here from China as an immigrant, and there's really no reason why I can't be successful when he was able to come here with no English background and be successful here. So like, I always try to take it one step back and look at bigger picture thing. It's a privilege for us to be able to work on this, and Francois in different ways as well. So that's been, in my opinion, if I had to take a step back, the ability to just go through those conversations without jeopardizing our relationship has been the greatest success story. And I really hope that will continue on as we continue to build CloudForecast.
Bravo. Yeah, bravo to that, because co-founder disputes and co-founder split-ups are some of the biggest reasons, some of the most frequent reasons that startups fail. So thanks for all your wisdom today, man. I really appreciate it. And you're quite active in Connect, and I know folks have seen you around. So I think it's cool if they get to see your face and hear what you're up to. If they want to follow, I know you guys are at CloudForecast on Twitter, and obviously if there's someone listening to this, it's like, hey, I do have AWS potential, to be overcharged or to let stuff go. CloudForecast.io. Thanks a lot for joining me.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Rob.
Absolutely, it was a pleasure. So in wrapping up, a couple housekeeping items. I don't know that I mentioned ZenHammer's information. It's Get ZenHammer on Twitter, and it's getzenhammer.com. That was Edwin's URL, and obviously cloudforecast.io is Tony, who we were just speaking with. Three housekeeping items before we wrap up. The first is the MicroConf On Air podcast is airing this live stream every Thursday morning, and then every Tuesday morning we are airing MicroConf talks. And we started with the top 5 of all time. I do a little intro and outro to give it a little bit of context, but it's the audio from these really, to be honest, amazing talks. I mean, it's 5 best out of 200 something talks that we have. And we're just going to continue with that. I don't remember what the next playlist is we're doing, but producers Andrew and I are putting these out every Tuesday morning. So MicroConf On Air, search for that in any podcatcher, or you can listen on the web at microconfpodcast.com. As always, we are on YouTube, youtube.com/microconf. You should head over there and subscribe if you haven't already, so you can be notified about these videos as well as all the other stuff we're putting out there. And finally, thank you to Basecamp and Stripe. They're our headline partners for the year, and we really appreciate their involvement. And we just think the world of these companies and how they do business, and feel like they fit the MicroConf ethos really, really well. So next Wednesday, we will be live streaming once again. We'll be doing more MicroConf On Air, same time, same place. It's microconfonair.com every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for joining us. See you next week.